I guess the first question that comes to mind is, why did I choose this theme? I'm not intrinsically negative. I'm not a Cassandra. I see a lot of value and opportunities in what we have come to call big data. However, to make good uses of the mounting factual resources, we need to anticipate the effects, or at least understand them. So we should seek to avoid at least mitigate the negative outcomes, including especially any threats. It is primarily a question of management of adequate social systems and human responses rather than the technical systems that appear to advance on autopilot. I begin with a comparison of the print and digitally networked paradigms. After more than 2 decades of this, you're well versed in these differences. The point I want to emphasize is that these differences are not just quantitative, but qualitative. In order to make optimal uses of the opportunities afforded by the digital revolution, we need to deconstruct the print paradigm and reconstruct it on the net. And I submit after 20 years we have not done that very well. We are now entering into the second phase of that digital revolution, which we broadly refer to as big data. And what does this mean? The first 2 speakers of the session certainly explored many aspects of that. And there is obviously a quantitative element to it. In the 1980s, a gigabyte was considered a lot of data. In the 1990s, I was fond of saying that we need gigabytes for terabytes when managing Earth observation satellite data. A terabyte was a lot of data then. We entered the petabyte era about the beginning of this decade, and at least for certain cutting-edge applications. And the exabyte era is not far ahead of us. And a whole lot of yadas are lurking in the not-too-distant future. This huge increase in data collection and storage is driven by Moore's law, which posits demonstrably until at least now that the capabilities of transistors and microprocessors will double every 1.5 or 2 years. This is likely to slow down, but will nevertheless continue to advance. The other major factor is our ability to collect data about ever more fine-grained layers of characteristics about everything around us, including ourselves, from the nanoscale to the macroscale. We are thus accumulating unprecedented information about our natural environment through remote sensing and sensor arrays. Genomic research has become the book of life. In molecular biology, about all living beings, and especially humans. The Internet of Things and 3D printing is characterizing and relating everything in the constructed environment. Huge databases in businesses mine financial, marketing, and other data. And electronic signal processing capabilities that have been alluded to now allow our public servants to spy pervasively on us all. In short, virtually everything now can be captured, represented, and manipulated in a digital database. But this trend has qualitative aspects too, over and above the rise of the network itself and the torrent of data. It is these aspects, or the soft infrastructure issues that pose threats to our society, that need to be addressed and require a social response, and one I would like to spend some time on. The first item on this list is disintermediation. This phenomenon is not new in the digital era. The first to go, starting already in the 1990s, were some of the legacy publishers, such as the small newspapers, and especially the intermediaries, such as books and music stores, movie rental outlets, and indeed the concept of disintermediation itself rose from these examples. Libraries have been looking for new organizing principles, and not just places for students to socialize. Snail mail services are stressed. bricks and mortar retailers are impacted, and the list goes on. The rise of big data promises a lot more disruptive change, however. When the databases depicting all manufactured goods are distributed broadly to foreign outlets or even millions of consumers for additive manufacturing, also known as 3D printing, what will the consequences be? For one, there will be millions of new product designers customizing and improving on those goods. Large swaths of manufacturing workers will lose their jobs. Shipping and trucking services will shrink. Products will have a lower carbon footprint, but new sources of 3D printer pollution may arise. If the costs of genomic sequencing fall to a few hundreds of dollars, or even less, several billion individuals will carry a couple terabytes of data, the equivalent holdings of a research data center a mere 20 years ago, on their wrists or in their pockets. How will this and the rise of personalized medicine change the medical profession and related services? Or when all autos become driverless through the ability to process massive amounts of geospatial data and accidents become eradicated, what will happen to the workers in everyone's favorite business, the auto repair and body shop? What will happen to the car insurance industry? These changes and many more will be the direct or indirect result of big data analysis and applications. While many workers will be disintermediated, other services and professions will grow or emerge. However, the people losing their jobs will probably not be the ones to enter the new ones. What is certain is that there will be massive labor shifts and social disruptions in relatively short times that will end up challenging our social fabric. So how can we be prepared for that, and what will happen in the likely event that we are not? Second issue is playing God. I know that the genomics community doesn't like this moniker, but I think it will stick, whether misleading or not. Molecular biology has spawned synthetic biology and the reverse engineering of life itself. Craig Venter filed a patent for the first artificial microbe created from a database in 2011. The digital manifestation is now the wave equivalent of the physical particle, and we have come full circle. Moreover, additive manufacturing promises the print-on-demand capability of custom organs and body parts. Bioinformatics in the 1990s has already led to the ability to insert genes from one organism to another, say a pig trait into another animal, or a lethal virus into a common vegetable. All these applications are either data-dependent or data-intensive, and will become even more so. They have profound ethical and socio-political implications, and possibly a great threat potential. Third area is the end of privacy. We've heard about that already. It is fair to say that this issue has received the most publicity in the recent past. Probably the most data-intensive application is the U.S. National Security Administration agency's global spying program and the archiving of massive databases, which were exposed last year by Edward Snowden. True government spying has been carried out since time immemorial, but the intrusive scale and capabilities for doing so is unprecedented. More prosaic and perhaps less well known are the spy satellites with extremely high rates, data rates, and sensors with a resolution of a few centimeters. To imagine just how capable those classified satellites are, the current commercial satellites that are open of the Digital Globe Corporation in the United States have a spatial resolution of just 31 centimeters, which they advertise broadly. Quite well known, too, are the law enforcement and public security cameras that are now ubiquitous in most large cities. I recall reading about 5 years ago that the average resident of London was photographed by over 50 different cameras, both public and private, every day. Now it's probably constant when outside the home, on the street, in the store, on public transport, and even at work. These videos and photos are also kept in huge databases, at least for some period of time, and mined for various uses. Not to be outdone, at least in the United States, are the commercial databases of consumer habits. There are companies that surreptitiously aggregate some 1,500 personal characteristics about every potential customer. These include economic, employment, educational, medical, transportation, and many other traits. These data are sold to other firms primarily for marketing purposes. These independent databases are paralleled by other very large databases collected by major corporations regarding our economic status and buying habits. The propensities of each individual are monitored online even when you are at work or at home. Criminals frequently hack into and steal millions of credit card numbers and ancillary information, as well as the identities of the unsuspecting. Nude pictures and highly private details are hacked as well and posted publicly on social media. And whatever is left out of the personal picture can be deduced by mosaicing all these data sources. In short, there is no privacy anymore, especially in the United States, although it probably doesn't matter for many of these purposes where you are in the world anymore. The potential for misuse of this information, even beyond the overtly criminal acts, is palpable. Fourth area is inequality. Data are increasingly valuable, especially when they are well curated and capable of sophisticated analysis and integration with other data sources. We have not yet learned how to monetize them very well, however. Early examples were the quants on Wall Street some 15 years ago, who crunched numbers and developed derivatives and other financial exotica. And we all know where that got us, at least those of us not in the top 1%. I blame this tongue-in-cheek on the end of the Cold War that led to a marked increase in public funding, a decrease in public funding for the physical sciences, and resulted in turn in the hiring of unemployed American physicists and Russian emigre mathematicians on Wall Street. And the rest is history, at least until 2008. More recently, large trading firms have used big data to game the system by automatically making trades of stocks in milliseconds before everyone else. Big data can also lead to more productive marketing, as we have seen, and make a lot of other business processes such as inventory control, risk management, and labor allocation much more efficient. In those cases in which big data cannot be monetized, massive secret data collection, whether protected from disclosure through national security or trade or secret laws, makes the holders of such information much more powerful. If taken to an extreme and unchecked, a pervasive opticon on society can lead to unbridled power and negative utopias, such as the Orwellian state. In the research sector, those who can collect, process, and analyze databases have increasingly privileged positions for knowledge, creation, and use over those who do not possess such means. There is an inherent and undeniable inequality in these positions. Inequality has always been a feature of society. History is replete with often rabid attempts to eradicate it, and that have invariably failed. Yet big data are an increasingly powerful means to solidify and increase market share or political power. The gap can widen between the haves and the have-nots, whether that is on the global level between the developed North and the developing South, or even within countries themselves. And while big data inevitably sharpens these differences, whether they are economic, political, or merely scientific, access to and use of such resources will not lead to greater wisdom. Fifth area is complexity. There is a Zen quality to the acquisition of facts, in that the more we learn, the less we know. Big data allows us to dig deeper in everything around us, But as every good scientist knows, greater understanding leads to more questions than answers. The questions may be better, but they are still questions. The trap of complexity is exacerbated by the collection and use of big data. Seemingly simple problems become intractable. Difficult problems become the source of conflict. If we cannot agree on what lunches to serve our children at school, how can we hope to respond to the problems of climate change? Whether we harness big data and models or not, what's clear is that big data is no panacea and over-reliance is a mirage. 6 areas, what I call Luddite reactions. Luddites were a small rural movement operating in Britain here for several years in the early 19th century. They destroyed or abandoned the use of technological equipment and generally advocated simple living. According to Kirkpatrick Sale, neo-Luddism today is, quote, a leaderless movement of passive resistance to consumerism and the increasingly bizarre and frightening techniques of the computer age, end quote. Despite my litany of threats from big data, I'm not a Luddite. I do not see the world in black and white. But there are a lot of people who do. People working in sectors who lose their jobs, people who have strong religious and ethical convictions against new biology or invasions of privacy, and people who are disenfranchised from the wealth and knowledge made possible by big data will all be disaffected and angry about the perceived and real problems that may be created. In democracies, such people vote and can elect representatives with similar interests. A good example already is the political opposition to addressing climate change and the complete disregard of big data findings. In dictatorships, such people can assume leadership roles, either using big data for nefarious ends or opposing modernity altogether. The point I want to make is that some of the threats, if left unchecked, will breed reactionary forces or worse. So I would like to conclude the second part of my talk by briefly raising some issues that don't rise to the level of threats, but that nonetheless may constitute a weakness or concern, the W in the SWOT analysis. Unlike the threats, which may affect society at large, these problems are more focused on the research and STM publishing community. I will raise a number of questions for ongoing discussions. So in the area of STM research issues, science is increasingly data intensive and computational. Researchers use very large data sets that are either from a single facility that produces a fairly homogeneous data set, or a compilation of contributed data that can be extremely heterogeneous and of varied quality. Moreover, proprietary software or algorithms may be used to generate the results. Finally, the research itself may be highly complex and difficult to understand or impossible to reproduce. Is the existing peer review system adequate for such eventualities? In the past, the scientific method required the formation of a hypothesis first and the testing of that hypothesis through experimentation or observation. The collection of big data often can invert that process. Has that methodological option been adequately explored? Is it an advance or is it a corruption of the research process? Big data can cost a lot to keep, even with declining storage costs. A categorization of reference, community, and personal research project data sets is increasingly being used to distinguish among them, and what is to be shared and under what rules. Metrics of research data use is a relatively new field of inquiry. Do big data have additional characteristics that need to be measured or understood? And finally, it is clear that one size does not fit all. That is true of small or big data, but how do big data change that equation? I'd like to focus just on the last two of these data policy issues. Over the last 3 decades or so, intellectual property law has given longer, broader, and stronger protections to content. It is safe to say that the legal regime has sought to make the internet safe for the print medium. For the proponents, more protection is always better. But is that actually the case? Open access policies and common use licensing have sprouted up all over the world in the last decade, seeking to rebalance the legal protectionism for public science. As big data become more prevalent, there will be forces that seek to protect the value and investment in those resources, and forces that seek to standardize and improve data sharing and reuse in the public sphere, also to improve the value of the public investment. How will intellectual property law progress, and what legal innovations will satisfy both perspectives? Data for policy and decision-making generally is a big deal. Governance in both the public and private spheres can be greatly improved with comprehensive and accurate factual information. However, many decision makers wish to be unencumbered by facts and like to construct realities that are more to their liking. Will big data make such spurious behavior more difficult? What processes can be put in place that better support fact-based decisions? On the economic front, I see much more emphasis on efficiency and productivity in the public sector. Governments are inefficient and have much room for improvement. Public budgets are not growing, and big data are expensive to collect, curate, and keep. With the necessary data infrastructure competes with the research funding in a zero-sum game. So how will the public research funders view the investments in big data programs? How will the return on public investments be measured? What kinds of partnerships will become dominant? From a sociocultural standpoint, there is an adage that old habits die hard. One can certainly see that in digital science generally and data science specifically. The rise of big data only makes that change more urgent. We are making very slow social progress in relation to the speed of technological change. What can we do to speed the social response up? Finally, I would like to say a few words about institutional responses and human resources. Smart institutional design will be of paramount importance. What will be the role of digital libraries, of public data centers, of cloud services, of national and international consortia? We have not figured that out well for digital science, much less for the new stresses that big data will surely bring. On the workforce front, it is clear that we need to educate and retain or retrain many new data managers and digital curators. There are growing employment opportunities everywhere and a lack of qualified people to fill them. It is also clear that we need to automate as many processes as possible related to the management of big data. What are the barriers to achieving that? And what are the limits? So I thank you for your attention.